Olivewood Gardens and Learning Center in National City, California, and welcome back to my kitchen. In our last session, we talked about whole grains, what they are, why we would like to eat them, and what they do for our bodies. And today what we're going to do is we're going to make a really easy brown rice recipe. And I like brown rice. I think it's really delicious. I think it has a lot more flavor than white rice. But because it's a whole grain, like we talked before, it does cook a little bit differently. So let's reflect a second on what we learned last time. And that is that brown rice is a whole grain. And what does it mean that it's a whole grain? It means that it has all of the essential parts of the seed or the kernel intact. The bran, the germ, and the endosperm. So if you see here a white rice and a bowl of brown rice, you can see that the brown rice has this brown color and it's a little bit darker. Some brown rices could be darker than this, but you can see that there's a difference, much like what you would see between white flour and whole wheat flour. They're both made from wheat, but one is refined to remove part of the kernel, and the other remains intact. So, and when it remains intact, that gives it its color, that's brown color. It gives it that flavor, that nutty flavor that is so delicious. And it also gives it extra fiber and minerals. And because of this, it takes more water when it cooks. So together today, we're gonna do a really easy brown rice recipe that toasts the rice beforehand, which brings out that nutty flavor, and uses a little bit of olive oil, 1 teaspoon of olive oil. And then we see here again, we have our veggie broth that we made in our last video. And this is diluted with water a little bit, but you'll still see it's rich. And this is 2 cups of rice. And what we're doing, I'm doing this on an induction burner, but you can use it on any stovetop. And I am starting the heat at medium. We don't want to make it too high because we're using olive oil, and olive oil has a low smoke point, which means it doesn't like a lot of heat. So I'm putting this on medium. And I'm gonna let this olive oil heat up just a little bit. Now, you may have another recipe that you use to make brown rice that doesn't use oil. Olive oil is a healthier oil, and it's a very small amount for a lot of rice. So we're gonna let this heat up just for a little bit. And then I wanna show you something else. So we talked about the whole grain of rice being a whole grain. Part of that is we can distinguish it by its color, but you can't. Here's another whole grain, which is farro, which is a wheat product, which you cook like pasta, but also dark brown. When I made the example of flour earlier, I said you could tell it from brown and from white. But another whole grain is quinoa, and if you can see here, see that it's 3 different colors. This is a tri-colored quinoa. It comes in, amongst other colors, white or off-white color, a red, and a black. So all of these are whole grains. It's just that the germ on each of these is a different color. So when you see quinoa, don't always know that it's a whole grain, no matter what color it is. So here, our oil is heating up. And we'll let that, I can start to smell it. And I really like the way that olive oil smells. Oh, and we're gonna need a little salt. So when you're cooking, you probably want everything to be where it's supposed to be when you start off, ideally. My broth does have a little salt in it, but we're gonna need a little bit more. It's not enough to give the rice its flavor. So now I can see a little bit of heat rising from this pan, and I'm gonna pour my 2 cups of brown rice in here. And you can hear it sizzling. And what I'm doing here is I'm moving the rice around And you can see just looking in there that the oil is not a lot. It's only a teaspoon of oil, which is very little amount of oil. You could probably use less if you would like to. And the rice is starting to smell. And this is the toasting part. And by toasting it, you'll smell that nuttiness coming out, the nutty smell flavor, and it'll start to waft. And also as we're toasting it, you'll notice that the rice becomes a little browner. It starts to look toasted. I would show you, but I don't think it will show up on camera. But it smells really good. So when you're at home, you'll do this step probably for about 2 to 5 minutes. And I would ask if there's somebody with you to have them smell it too. To make sure, because sometimes when you're sitting here and you have it, it's like, oh yeah, it smells toasty, but it's not. You could toast it just a little bit longer. Also, today we're using a long grain rice, brown rice, which means it's about 4 times as long as it is wide. So that's going to be a long grain as opposed to a short stubby rice. So a long grain rice, when it cooks up, is very fluffy. Each grain is separate, and it has a very elegant look to it. If you use a short grain rice, you might need a little bit more water. It could take a little bit longer to cook, but it's also a stickier rice. It turns out sticky. It's a rice that they commonly use in sushi. So, a long grain rice we use in pilafs, rice salads, or just general rice blends. Maybe your mom makes a red rice. She probably uses a long grain rice for that. So now I'm looking at this, and it is toasty, and I can smell it. And it has a really nice, lovely smell. Like if I stand back for a second, I can smell the rice, and it smells good. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take my veggie broth and pour it in. So I'm using veggie broth because I like the flavor that it gives this rice. I'm also using veggie broth because I have it and I just made it. If you don't have veggie broth, don't worry about it. Just use water. It's just as good. So I'm gonna add a little salt. And what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna wait for this to boil. And it'll take a few minutes for it to boil. I'm gonna keep it at medium heat though. Maybe I'll turn it up a little bit just to make the process go a little bit faster. And we're just gonna wait for it to start simmer boiling. Not a full rolling boil like you would when you're making pasta, but right when it's about to start boiling. And I'm not stirring it. You'll notice that I'm not stirring it the way that you would pasta. Now, if you have a rice maker at home, you could do this without the toasting step in just the brown rice setting. And so here you'll see that our rice is about ready to get going. It's there, it's doing what we want it to do. And I'm going to lower it to a low heat. And I'm gonna set a timer for 35 minutes. And in 35 minutes, I'm gonna come back and check on the rice. Welcome back to the kitchen. It's been about 35 minutes and our rice is done. But before I open this rice, I wanna go over really one quick thing for you. I had some time while rice was cooking and I realized that I had made a mistake in talking about quinoa. So the outer coating that makes the color in quinoa is actually the bran. So if you look, I also had some time to draw this little diagram of a grain, and we'll see here the bran is this outer layer here, that's the brown. The germ here is the embryo, so like grains are a seed, so this is the part that will sprout right here and here. is the endosperm, and that provides nourishment for the germ when it sprouts. So I open it, here's some steam, and I look in and my rice is beautiful. So I'm not stirring it, but I'm gonna try it. And it's hot, so I wanna be careful. More careful than I was. And it's perfect. But you might open it and you might see more water in there, or some of that broth remaining. So you could try it, make sure that it's done, and if it's done, just drain the water out. Or you could cook it for a little bit longer if it doesn't taste finished yet. I hope you enjoy this quick, simple recipe, and have a great day.